So first thing I'm going to explain is inflation. Now it may sound common sense, but just allow me to explain what is inflation, right? Now, inflation, usually they measure the rate of rising of the price of goods. All of us will know. So usually, as the years go by, the inflation will go up or go down. Up or down? Usually up, which means that things are getting more and more expensive, right? So when things become more and more expensive, is it good for us as a consumer, yes or no? No. So we do not want inflation to keep going up. Yeah, but the question is, if we do not want inflation to keep going up, then what is the so-called the right range? Where it's not too high, where it's not too low, so that we don't feel affected, right? And then business still can run. Yeah. So this inflation, and this one you already know it occurs when prices increases due to the production cost. So this inflation. So usually, generally, when inflation goes up, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing, right? So let me just share with you US history. Since we are talking about investing in US company, right? Just now I went around, there are quite a number of US companies. So let me just share with you, very interesting. Throughout the history of US, there is this thing called the Great Inflation. I mean, we have heard before the Great Depression, but there is this thing called the Great Inflation. So can you imagine that inflation peaked over 10% in 1974? So just imagine that if your annual increment is 3%, then inflation is 10%. Wow, then right? Every single year you lose 7%. It's quite dangerous, right? So not only it appeared once, it appeared twice. So it drops and then it peaked again in 1980. So when inflation is so high, things become so expensive, right? How will the economy go? Will it become better or worse if things are so expensive and then we cannot afford? Yeah, because it's expensive, you don't want to spend, right? Yeah, everybody all tightening back, right? So when you tighten back, what happened to the economy? Become better or worse? Worse. And it becomes so worse that there was a recession. Yeah, so high inflation such as this is a bad thing. So there was a recession, and then somehow, because of the recession, the inflation drops. Like, somehow it's like Mother Nature, it corrects itself. So the inflation dropped during the recession of the early 1980s and remained low ever since. Low is about 2%. So right now, US inflation hovers about 2%. Now, so as of the past 10 years, since 2010 or 20, now their inflation is about 1.5. It's about 1.5. And there are two types of inflation. One is called a headline inflation. In other words, the one that we commonly talk about inflation is actually a headline inflation. And then there's a core inflation. And this core inflation does not include the prices of food and fuel, and average about 1.3 because they exclude, that's why the number is lower. Then there are two sides to inflation. The one that we always talk about is high inflation. But just to let you know that when inflation becomes lower, there's also a problem. Hi, this is Cayden. Remember to click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification to be notified of our future training videos. So there is a balance, okay? So just now, we talked about high inflation, right? So now the question is, high inflation is bad, then how can low inflation be bad, right? Let me share with you in the perspective of economics, what does it mean? Now, when high inflation is things get very expensive. Now, when things become very cheap, how can it be bad, right? Now, the interesting thing is there is a psychological phenomenon. When things become very cheap, the consumers like us are thinking, hey, anyway, 6 months down the road, it's going to become cheaper, right? Why buy now? You know the psychology? I really know it's going to get cheaper, so why buy now? So I will delay buying. When I delay buying, right, everybody delay buying. Businesses will become good or bad? Bad, because, hey, now nobody want to buy from me. Then I further decrease my price to attract more people. So there's a vicious cycle, right? They become worse and worse. So eventually, the ultimate endpoint is if inflation is really low, right? Eventually, business will be affected. The economy is going to become worse. And eventually, if my business don't do well, where got money to pay staff, right? So the wages will be depressed. So this is one side of the coin in terms of inflation. And that is one of the causes that leads to the recession in 2008-2009. And then eventually, trigger off unemployment. Yeah, so you can see like one small thing, and then eventually you end up with a recession. Yeah. Then of course, why high inflation is already also bad? Again, this is what we have explained. Things become expensive, economy is slow down, unemployment to increase. Now, so if high is bad, if low is bad, there must be an optimum, right? So the optimum based on the Fed, is about 2%. If they can maintain about 2%, that means it's not high, it's not low. Everything is a balance.